Today on Inside Utah Politics, it's decision time. Primary voters will select party nominees for governor in a number of congressional races on Tuesday. We're breaking down the races with the Hinckley Institute of Politics. Plus, Republican registration is skyrocketing ahead of the election. What impact will unaffiliated and Democratic voters who have crossed over have on the race for governor? Our panel debates.
Time now for Inside Utah Politics.
Thanks for joining us. I'm Glenn Mills. It is time to go inside Utah politics, and we do begin with Jason Perry. He's the director of the Hinckley Institute of Politics. He's here to dig into some of the big primary races that will be decided on Tuesday. Jason, welcome back to the show. Always glad to have you with us.
Glad to be with you, Glenn.
All right, let's start off with the Republican primary for governor. I would say this is one of the most intriguing races I've ever covered in my career. Talk about the dynamics that are all coming together in this one race.
Well, you are right. This is the race to watch, not just in this election, but we have to go back a long ways to see something as competitive as this. These are names that people know very well in the state of Utah, and they're voting at a time when there are some issues they really care about. This is the big ticket race, and everyone's watching it. In fact, so many people are watching it, there are record numbers of people registering as Republicans just to be part of it.
Yeah, more than 72,000 since the beginning of May. So we have just seen a huge explosion there compared to previous years. Let's talk about the polling trends. We've seen them kind of up and down and all around. What are we seeing, though, as we come down the stretch?
Well, you and I have talked about it so many times. What's interesting about this race is this plurality issue. We always knew that the winner of this primary for the Republican Party was going to be able to win this with 35% of the vote. And it's been interesting to watch the polls. The two top candidates, without question, Jon Huntsman and Spencer Cox. Every poll that has occurred has those two neck and neck, depending on the poll, which one is up by a couple percentage points. That's the one to watch. Interestingly, we've seen a nice surge for Greg Hughes over the past couple of weeks, not up to those same 30+% that we're seeing with Governor Huntsman or Lieutenant Governor Cox, but still a nice rise for him. And Thomas Wright still is appealing to a certain segment, particularly the conservative part of the aisle. But this is too close to call right now, with the two candidates being very clear.
All right, so how do you expect things to play out as far as the campaigns go over these next 2 days as they're trying to push every last voter to the polls?
Yeah. That is what the interesting strategy is, because there's not a lot you can do in the last couple of days. The media strategies are kind of set, the media buys have happened, the ads are out. So really a couple of things that these candidates are going to be doing. One is they're going to start using some of their ambassadors, the people that have endorsed them. They're going to go out to their constituents, they're going to go out to the people who trust them, and they're going to say, just send in that ballot. And I think a lot of people are going to. I think that will have an impact. But there are a few people here, even at the end, that are really paying close attention to what's happening with COVID-19, with this pandemic. There are some people right now watching what's happening in the state of Utah, and they're going to wait to the end, because that is a primary issue for those voters. And they're going to say, who do I trust to get us out of this? And I think those are going to be the late term ballots.
And I should correct myself. I shouldn't say that they're pushing people to the polls, because the polls won't be open on Tuesday. So I just want to make that clear. Mail-in ballots. You mentioned those who are getting behind the ambassadors, the endorsements. That's been one of the fascinating storylines in this race. We have seen, like with Jon Huntsman, everyone from Senator Mike Lee to Equality Utah get on board there, and then Spencer Cox has a ton of local elected officials backing him. Typically, I say endorsements don't mean much in a race, but boy, that has been interesting in this one.
Yeah, I would say that's true. And I think that in this particular race, given the fact that we're not able to get the candidates in front of the people directly, most of it is done virtually, these ambassadors, the people that are coming out to endorse, are having a bigger impact than you normally see, because this is who voters are able to get in touch with right now. And in lieu of going face-to-face, who do I trust and who are they picking? It's going to make a difference in this race.
If the most recent polls are showing us within the margin of error, and we talked about that huge section of crossover voters, who does that benefit?
Well, you have to look at it this way. So a lot of these people who have transitioned, about 45,000 of those 72,000 were unaffiliated voters that are joining back with their party. About 10,000 of those voters came from the Democrats themselves. What's interesting about that is these are people who affiliated. They went through the pain of becoming affiliated, which means they are going to send in one of those ballots. And all polling suggests that that's a slight favor for Jon Huntsman for that particular group.
All right, let's move on to the 1st Congressional District. This is a race, or a seat, I should say, that hasn't been open in some 18 years. It did draw a big crowd. What about the significance of what we're seeing there?
Well, that is such an interesting race. And for people that are watching that in Utah, you were right. So Rob Bishop held that position for 18 years, a long time. Jim Hansen held that position for 22 years before that. It has been so long since there's really been an opportunity for a candidate to come forward and own that race for the 1st Congressional District. What's interesting in this race is there are not a lot of really high-profile names that have thrown their hat into the ring for this one. And that's why we're really not seeing a lot of people really make their decision. Yes, a huge percentage of the voters in the 1st Congressional District are still undecided as of this past week.
Yeah.
So really, I was going to say, who's going to be able to help save Hill Air Force Base? Who's going to be able to make a case for public lands? Those are the 2 top issues, and we'll see which one of these candidates can really get the people to believe in them for those issues.
Yeah, you mentioned that last poll we saw. It showed Bob Stevenson and Blake Moore at the top, but just a huge amount of undecided. And I want to hit on one other thing you said there. Some high-profile names, not only not getting in, but they said no thanks. Why is that? Are we starting to see people look at Congress and say, you know what, I don't want anything to do with that. I'm going to stay here in Utah?
Yeah, I think that's a little bit of the reason. I'll give 2 reasons. One is most people are just really worried about this governor's race, and so that's where all the attention went, particularly the candidates. But the reality is, in this 1st Congressional District, a lot of the people that were recruited to run for that position just decided not to do it. I think it's a reflection of what's happening in Washington, D.C., and more people wanting to handle the issues closer to home than spending time in Washington, D.C.
Okay, let's move on to the 4th Congressional District. It is the only congressional seat from Utah held by a Democrat, that of course Representative Ben McAdams. 4 Republican candidates in the primary for that one. What are we seeing there as we come down the stretch? Because that nationwide is one that's always watched about when we talk about the balance of power in the House of Representatives.
Well, you are right about that. This is such an important spot, and you've done such great analysis on this in the past too, Glenn. This is a district that leans Republican. It has a plus Republican number, but it has become the most competitive seat that we have in the state of Utah, which is why we have a Democrat that is representing us in Ben McAdams. And in terms of him being an incumbent, he is in a really great position right now leading into this race. The candidates for Republican are very interesting. Right now, Burgess Owens is the candidate that is polling ahead of all the other would-be candidates. And it's been very interesting because these candidates are well known in their own respective spaces. You know, a pro football player, a former state legislator, a businessman, also a radio host. It's so interesting that these candidates right now are doing well with people that know them, but they really need to get crossover. Mm-hmm. They need some people from these other camps to come over and join them. And that hasn't really been the case so far, which is why even with these candidates, you don't really see any one of them, even Burgess Owens, really over 36%.
But we do have to assume that the Republican nominee will get a lot of backing from national Republicans in this race, correct?
Yeah, okay. You are absolutely right about that. I mean, this is a key position, as you already said. Yeah. You know, maybe we have a Democrat right there, but Republicans nationwide are looking at that particular position, and resources will flow behind whoever the Republican candidate is.
Okay, Jason, we're going to have to end it on that note. As always, appreciate your time and your analysis. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Glenn.
Still to come, as we just heard, polls indicate a tight race for the Republican nomination for governor. So who will be pushed to the top? Our panel will weigh in a little later. But first, the coronavirus pandemic has nearly grounded the airline industry. So what will air travel be like post-pandemic? What national lawmakers are saying after the break. Stay-at-home orders and travel restrictions left airplanes nearly empty for months. Now, as states begin to lift those restrictions, airlines are quickly making adjustments to make sure their passengers stay safe. Washington correspondent Anna Warnicki reports on how lawmakers are taking a look at the future of flight amidst the COVID-19 era.
The best way to stay safe is to stay home.
Texas Republican Congressman Brian Babin says concerns over the spreading coronavirus led to virtually empty skies, with passenger airline traffic down 96% in April compared to last year.
This does not bode well for an industry that our nation depends upon so heavily.
Worldwide, the air travel industry is projected to lose more than $300 billion in gross operating revenues this year.
Oklahoma Democratic Congresswoman Kendra Horn says $25 billion in grants passed by Congress helped ease the pain. But now airlines face their toughest battle yet, regaining the trust of passengers.
With each airline determining its own approach, individuals are left on their own about what is safe. That's a confusing place to be.
Heather Kraus with the Government Accountability Office told lawmakers that the federal agencies have dropped the ball and left airlines with no direction.
The U.S. still lacks a comprehensive national aviation preparedness plan to limit the spread of communicable diseases through air travel.
Babin says airlines have stepped up to ensure passengers and crews are safe.
Increased cleaning protocols, passenger screenings, masks, social distancing, and limited movement in the cabin.
But Babin says without a federal plan, the risk of COVID-19 or any virus spreading remains sky high. In Washington, I'm Anna Warnicki.
President Trump is pushing for tough prison sentences for anyone who vandalizes monuments on federal property. Protesters attempted to topple a statue of Andrew Jackson in Lafayette Square during the week. Democrats on Capitol Hill are saying rather than defending racist and controversial figures in history, President Trump should pay attention to what protesters want and why. Washington correspondent Alexandra Limon reports.
The word killer was painted across the base of President Andrew Jackson's statue in a park outside of the White House, and protesters attempted to topple the statue.
Numerous people are in jail and going to jail today.
Now President Trump promises 10-year prison sentences for those who vandalize monuments on federal property.
We are looking at long-term jail sentences for these vandals and these hoodlums and these anarchists.
Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell says protesters want to erase history.
Governors and mayors have stood down and watched criminals spray paint churches and topple statues.
Democrats criticize President Trump for pushing for the harsh prison sentences, even as his administration works on prison reforms to try to reduce many sentences. Nevada Congresswoman Dina Titus says President Trump's reaction is quite different than when white supremacists held protests in Charlottesville.
With Nazi symbols, Ku Klux Klan symbols, nobody else would think it's good people on both sides.
President Jackson forced tens of thousands of Native Americans on a deadly march to relocate to reservations known as the Trail of Tears. Titus says President Trump has lost touch.
It really is a national movement that he should address, and he won't. He just keeps playing to his base.
She says museums may be a better place to remember and learn about controversial figures, including Confederate leaders. In Washington, Alexandra Limon.
Now, this does all come as the Department of Interior's Inspector General announces an investigation into whether federal officers used excessive force against peaceful protesters outside of the White House 3 weeks ago. Still to come, will crossover voters sway the Republican primary this Tuesday? Our panel debates after the break.
You're watching Inside Utah Politics.
Time now to break down some of the big stories of the week with the Inside Utah Politics panel. This week we have State Senator Dan McCay and former State Senator Jim Dabakis. Gentlemen, great to have you with us. Thanks for being here.
I love that former line. You know, that just...
Hey,
I love that former line too.
Hey, I want you guys to know something.
Ya.
Before we start, I want you to know that the two of you are part of Inside Utah Politics history. For the first time ever, we have two Republicans on the panel.
That's both sides of the aisle for you.
I say I'm proudly wearing my Republican hat today.
Okay. Well, let's lead right into that. Let's get into crossover voting.
It's as invisible as his intentions, by the way.
All right, let's get into crossover voting. That's becoming a big storyline here in this election. Since May, we have had more than 72,500 Republicans register to vote. Now, we've also seen a sharp decline in unaffiliated, more than 43,000, and Democrats, more than 10,000. So that brings us to somewhere around 53,000 potentially that have crossed over. Jim, you were one of those. You made the call on this show a couple of months ago. What type of an impact is this going to have?
Well, the numbers from the beginning of the year are 107,000 people joining the Republican Party. On this show and before, on March 6th, I said, you know, Democrats, we've been trying the same thing for 40 years. And for 40 years, the Republicans have been rigging the whole system. We get no vote. We get no say. So let's play their game their way. Let's all become Republicans, and then we get a say about who's going to be in about both people that are going to be in the finals in November. And there is this drought in Utah because you have this small group of elitists that run the state, and they do it behind closed doors. They ignore the will of the people. That's why we have so many things on the ballot, because the Republicans have been ruling for so long that, this isn't a cliche, they really think that they know more about what the people should have than what the people won't have, and they've been very paternalistic. So we said this time, to hell with it, just play the game, and we will have a say on both candidates.
Okay,
and frankly, it's worked.
The reason I don't go back to the beginning of the year for that 100,000 figure is because we really started seeing the trend in the beginning of May. So, Dan, as a lifelong Republican, registered for years, does this bother you to see this happening?
No, not at all.
Why not?
Hey, my party is an expansive party. We are welcoming to people, and anybody that honestly wants to join us, come on out. I get it. Everybody's concerned about the Democrats infecting our elections. My problem is I feel bad for Jim. There are going to be so many that enjoy what they see that they're never going back, Jim. Never. See, being a Democrat is depressing. At the end of the day, all you want is more and more and more. And in the Republican Party, we've got solutions. We're trying to fight for the people. And I will take that all day long, being solutions-oriented rather than being some other, on the other side of the aisle. You know what I was really surprised with, Jim, and I got to hand it to you. I thought for sure in a statewide race, when you were talking about rigging, that you were going to bring up gerrymandering and how that was how that's been impacting statewide races like you did last year. So I'm grateful this year that we're not talking about gerrymandering in a statewide race.
Okay, Glenn, can I pick up gerrymandering for a second?
Oh, good.
Look, in a statewide race, though, Senator McKay does have a point there.
There's 200,000 people in Salt Lake City. They have no say about their congressman. Their congressman loathes them, and they loathe their congressman. It is not a good match. And in order to totally throw those 200,000 people in Salt Lake City out of having any representative, they've taken 200,000 people from Davis County, and then that very close by Washington County in St. George, and they've stuck them in together so that the people in Salt Lake have no say.
But Jim, the point is, though, that we're making here is statewide races. You can't say gerrymandering in a statewide race, and they still go heavily Republican.
I agree. Now, Lieutenant Governor Cox did try to take back the corner from Wyoming. So maybe in that way, he was trying to add a few more Republican votes. I don't know.
Jim,
anyway.
I want to get more to that point, though, where Senator McKay says, hey, you're all welcome, you're going to stay. Are you going to stay a registered Republican after this election?
We'll see. Please. It may well be, because I got a call from somebody who's running for the Senate. This senator said, or this person, he's a representative now, he's running for the Senate. And he said, you know what? You've got 4,400 new Democrats, Republicans this month in my district. Can you help me? Can you help me? Can you help me? I'm saying the people of Utah are not the whack fringe jobs that are in the legislature. They are out of touch. They're extremists, and all they worry about in life are those nutcases on the fringe part of their party. If we bring more players to the table, we're going to have a lot better government.
Okay.
Not only is he joining the party, but now he's one of our greatest data tools. I love it. Jim Dabakis, welcome to the party, and everybody else.
I have a feeling we're going to see a strong shift back after the election, but I could be wrong. Okay, I want to hear both of this from you, though. Have enough people crossed over to have a true impact on this election?
Well, we can only look back historically. So Jonathan Johnson took on Herbert last time in a primary. 243,000 people voted. So if we had 75, 85, 95, 100,000 people changing this time, assuming that the 245 stayed the same, and it probably will be more because there's more candidates. But I think that that block is a significant amount of people, and they're going to have an effect on the election, is my take.
What do you think, Senator?
I think it will have an impact on the election, and I think it will drive people to, and it will drive the candidates, honestly, to look at the race a little bit differently. But I'll tell you what, this race is going to be decided by Republicans one way or the other, and we're happy to have them.
Okay, let's move on to another topic. Governor Herbert has been pretty involved in this election, endorsing his Lieutenant Governor and Spencer Cox, but also we've learned of this conversation with him and Thomas Wright, asking Thomas Wright to get out of the race and potentially get some support down the road in a potential matchup with Senator Lee. We had Senator Lee on one of our newscasts earlier in the week, and he called it a heavy-handed approach, and he was quite surprised by that. What do you make of the governor's involvement in the primary election?
A total mistake. At the end of the day, the governor was well known who he was supporting. He was already throwing his support significantly behind, at least financially at that time, behind Lieutenant Governor. And then, you know, moving forward, trying to have a conversation with another candidate about stepping out of the race, you know, and using the guise of friendship to bring people together. That's inappropriate. It's not the kind of thing that we need to see in our elections. I'm grateful that at the end of the day, the voters see it for what it is. And the other part of this, too, that I think is really disconcerting is it's a real discredit to Thomas Wright, who is a fine candidate, a total gentleman. And if you've seen him in the past, if people have asked him these questions, he's always taken the high road. And I'll tell you, that is leadership to me. And Thomas, how he's responded to this whole thing, has shown me he's the kind of leader that has a bright future in the state of Utah with all these new Republicans.
So you're gonna vote for him?
Well, I think I've been very public about where I'm at.
Look, I don't care about Herbert talking to Thomas. I think in the pot of everything Herbert is doing cataclysmically wrong, that doesn't even enter. I mean, who sat down at the beginning of this with Herbert and Cox and said, okay, look, we can get some extra PR. You head up the COVID task force. What could possibly go wrong with that? I mean, it was a terrible political call in the first place. Cox should have stood up on his own and not had Herbert doing all of his bidding all along. I think that was another political mistake in the Cox campaign. And I think what happened is our COVID policy ended up being funneled through the political lens of we don't want to annoy those rural Utah voters, and we're going to give them whatever they want. And what did they want? They wanted all the safeguards closed down. They wanted no masks. They wanted nothing. And as Herbert and Cox acquiesced to that, we've seen this horrible thing happen.
But Jim, saying that politics wasn't going to be part of it is a ridiculous part of it as well. I do regret, though, about the COVID-19 response, that because of who the governor appointed to run the COVID task force in the beginning, that it does have a political tint to it. And that's extremely unfortunate. In ideal timing or something like that, which there is no ideal timing for a disaster like we're experiencing,
right?
You know, ideally it would be outside of an election year and this would not be something that we're dealing with. But this was a mistake, again, to, in my opinion, have it be a political person leading that commission. And when I was in the legislature and those announcements were made, that was my concern, and it's really regrettable to look back on.
We have like 10 seconds left. Who's your prediction? Who walks away with the Republican nomination for governor?
I'm going to say, Governor Herbert, order this. Not voluntary, order it.
I guess we're not going to get to predictions.
Huntsman.
Okay.
I'm going to say Greg Hughes.
All right. We will watch and see how it plays out. Thank you, gentlemen.
Maybe Thomas.
Stay with us. We'll be right back with more Inside Utah Politics right after the break. We leave you now with a look at what's on the radar in the world of politics. The primary election, as we've been saying, is Tuesday. That's also the same day, by the way, your ballot needs to be postmarked or it will not count, so make sure that happens. The winners will move on to the general election. That is set for Tuesday, November 3rd. Make sure to connect with me on social media. I'd like to know what you think of this show and other issues that are important to you. You can email me at InsideUtahPolitics@abc4.com. You can also follow me on Facebook and Twitter. Just log on and search Glenn Mills ABC4. Thanks so much for making us part of your day today. We hope to see you again next week as we go inside Utah politics.